Are you ready?
Yes. Well, hello. This is Marek Seymour. So glad to have you here for this occasion, this time together, um, as we talk about rethinking Christian education. So let me kind of back up a minute and just give you a little background of who am I. For those who don't know, I am a career educator, nearly 35 years of educational experience, and now a second time dean of education. Yeah, that means I train teachers and I train educational organizational leaders in the public school setting. Um, I am also a career church teacher, a Christian education director, and now a dean of leadership training school. And again, yeah, that means that I help other organizations within our Zion, within our church, build Christian education and build leadership. And so, what are we going to be talking about in this whole idea of rethinking Christian education? So, it's a series of discussions around Christian education, and based on a spinoff from the Rethinking Church. We are rethinking a major part of church, Christian education. If you think about it, think back to when you became a Christian. Some of us have to think way back, like me, and think about how you were brought into this whole idea of being a Christian, being a productive Christian. You know, some of you, it was passed on from generation to generation what they believed, and you were taught to believe it. It was your induction. Then some of us, we evolved into Sunday school and Bible studies. And so we were educated about becoming a Christian. And then some of us became Christians and learned this whole Christian thing through proclamation and Bible study and witnessing. And so those were the evolutions of our Christian education. And I'm reminded of my Sunday school teacher, Sister Wells. And you know that I said Sister Wells because back then you had to put a handlebar on that. You didn't call anybody by their name. And so I remember Sunday after Sunday, Sister Wells would teach the Sunday school lesson, and there was a certain expectation that you had to demonstrate that you learned what she was teaching in her class. And back then we had the days when we would start in Sunday school in one big group, and then we'd break off into classes. And I remember the superintendent would walk to make sure that you were in class. And if you weren't in class, he'd be ushering you to class. And after the Sunday school lesson in the individual classes, we reconvened and we had to report on what it was that you learned in class today. Some of you remember that you came through that same experience. And Sister Wells was one of those. She kind of had that stern look, and she wouldn't appoint someone, but she was expecting each one of us to get up and report what we had learned in class. And that was a week by week thing. And over time, you learned to stop waiting for her to call on you. But because you knew what Christianity was, you were confident in sharing with others. And that became our growth spurt and what we call Christianity. And as you can tell, as you know, rather, before I get ahead of myself, our world has gone through this transition, this disruption, this pandemonia called COVID-19, called social unrest, economic uncertainty, and every institution around the world has been affected by this intersection of pandemonia. And the church was not excluded. In fact, this pandemonia showed us that we still had some room to grow when it comes to our Christian education experience. And regardless of what we call Christian education, or regardless of what's the size of our church, regardless of the pedigree or the level of education in our church, everyone had to stop. And if you believe it or not, having to stop for some of us wasn't a bad idea. In fact, it gave us a chance to go back to the drawing board, to go back to what it was we were supposed to be doing. And so much of this training, much of these discussions about Christian education are going to be centered around what it is that the church should be doing, what it is that we're called to do. It's going to be based on Matthew 28:16, the Great Commission that calls for us to not just be saved for ourselves, but to be saved and to build and create more disciples who become disciplers. Now, again, it doesn't matter how wide your net was prior to the pandemonium. It doesn't matter how great you were. Everyone had to start over again. And for those who saw this as a positive thing, are going to do well. And my challenge for us while we're here in this space is to look at what it is that we're doing when it comes to developing other Christians. Remember that the intent or the outcome of the Great Commission is to make disciples, to draw men closer to God through salvation, but then it's also intended to make those who have accepted Christ stronger in the faith, so they too can be disciples. I'm thinking about a story that I heard of a pastor who was gung-ho about saving the lost, saving the lost. And every sermon, every week was about saving the lost, saving the lost. And one week he got a letter from one of his members, a member that had been with him from the very beginning of his ministry. And the letter said that they were leaving the church. Well, the pastor was puzzled because he's preaching, save the lost, save the lost. But in the letter, they explained that all of his messages, all of his efforts were about saving the lost. But what about those who had already been saved and those who were trying to live a Christian life? Where was the message for them? And if you think about it, that does happen if we're not careful. But the beauty of Christian education, true it is that we undergird the church and the efforts of the church. This is through Christian education. We learn who the church is, what the church is supposed to do, how it's supposed to function, and our gift, our job, is one of those jobs that you don't get a big thank you for, but you can tell when we don't do our job, when members of the church don't know how to function as Christians, when leaders don't know how to function as leaders. And so in this setting, when we come as we come together, we're going to talk about the major components of Christian education. Those components are teaching, discipleship, and programming. And so during this time, we'll talk about what does it mean to teach? What does it mean to disciple? And what is good programming? And it's not to say that there is not already great teaching going on. It's not to say that discipleship and programming is not great. But again, as a result of the pandemic, there is room for us to grow, room for us to improve. And I was reading a book some time ago about it was entitled "The Future Church." And in this book, it mentions, in fact, the book was by, I think it's Will Mancini. And in the book, it talks about three types of church. It talks about the program church, and the program church was heavy on organization, but it was light on discipleship. Then it talked about the home church. The home church was heavy on discipleship, but had no organization at all. And in the book, he encourages the reader to become a future church, where the church is heavy on organized discipleship. And that's basically what Christian education is: organized discipleship. And in this time together, as we meet each Monday, we're going to talk about teaching and discipleship and programming. I'm going to spend time teaching us how to teach, even if you don't have a teaching degree. how to exercise the gift that's within teachers to share the good news through a myriad of avenues throughout the church. We'll talk about discipleship and how to build a discipleship model that fits your church's ministry. And then we'll talk about programming, how to organize what it is that we need to do to be effective. And so each week, and you see the graphic there. Periodically we will rotate from one to the other. There'll be some teaching. I'll have some experts who have already gone through the process, who are going through the process to come and share with us, and they'll share their concerns and their burdens and their pitfalls and their stumbling blocks as well. But during this time, we'll share, and I gotta warn you, while many of the conversations are going to be light, a lot of the conversations are going to be heavy. They're going to cause us to have those critical conversations, those courageous discussions with our church. And here's what I realized: that this pandemic, it did not necessarily run people away from the church. In fact, it caused for individuals to go closer to the church. It is now our responsibility to make sure that after the evangelist has done their job out in the ministry field, that we have set in place program discipleship that will develop more disciples to become disciples, regardless of what's going on in the world, regardless of different pandemonium. Is the church doing what it should be doing, what she should be doing to build more disciples? In this time, we'll talk about what should be going on before you start teaching, what should be going on while you're teaching, what goes on after you're teaching. And during this time, we'll talk about that whole discipleship piece, like who is your discipleship market? How do we teach discipleship? And how do we expand our discipleship? And then we talk about programming. Now, it doesn't make sense to build disciples and there's nothing in place for them to sharpen their skills or sharpen their iron. There is a certain level of competency for members of the body of Christ who call themselves followers of Christ. And there's a certain level of competency among leaders of the Christian church. And of course, there is a certain level of competency for teachers within the church. And so each week, we'll talk about one of these three topics. We'll talk about one of these three topics, and I want you to make sure that you're involved. It's not going to be just me talking to you, but it's my intent, it's my hope, and it's my prayer to build a community where we learn and grow together. The Great Commission reminds us that it's not your mission, or it's not my mission, but it's our mission together if we call ourselves Christians. And so in this time together, the idea is that we learn from each other, we share with each other, and then we grow as a body of Christ. Now, as we go through this process, I want you to always click, like, and share. That's what I learned you're supposed to do in these things. Click, like, and share. But I don't want you to just share for the sake of sharing. I'm asking that you would reach out to your church and tell them that Merrick Seymour, that Reverend Seymour is talking about rethinking Christian education. I want you to reach out to your Christian ed directors and share with them that they're talking about how do we reframe Christian education. I want you to talk to your teachers and your pastors and tell them, look, on Monday nights, 7 p.m. Central, Reverend Seymour and others are talking about this big thing we call Christian education. While you're here, I want you to ask your questions, and I want you to make comments, and those aha moments, say so. If it's those hold up, Reverend, go back over that again, I want you to say so. But more importantly, I want you to pray that God be glorified in this work as we attempt to build this community, as we attempt to go forth in this exercise we call the Great Commission. And again, I share with you that there are going to be some tough conversations. There are going to be some some times where we really have to dig in and ask ourselves, are we doing all we can when it comes to Christian education? And then there'll be times where we get to examine what we've done and we see the fruit of our labor. A lot of times people will say, oh, well, we're doing this and we're doing that. And it's been my experience to always ask for one thing. If we're doing this thing, where is the evidence? Where is the evidence? I've learned that as a result of this pandemic, many people were already waiting for a reason not to return to church. They were coming out of obligation, out of tradition, out of honor because of someone before them, but they were really not there. We want to curve that. This is an opportunity for all of us to look at what we're doing, how we're growing disciples, how we are developing disciple makers for the kingdom. This is an opportunity for us to practice discipleship, to look at what it is that we're doing and determine what areas do we have to grow in. And then again, we want to take time in this short half hour that we're together to talk about how do we put together programming so that 25 and 30% of our members are part of Christian education in some fashion, whether it's Bible study, whether it's men's group, whether it's discipleship. How can we put programming together so that individuals are introduced to Christian education in terms where they are appropriate, where they have an opportunity to practice what they're learning, and then opportunity for them to exercise what they've learned as being a disciple. And so I trust that you will, again, click, like, and share with educators in the church, outside of the church. Click, like, and share with your pastor and your church leaders, and have them join us here on Mondays, 7 p.m. Central. And I pray that God will richly bless you for your sharing. So this is Reverend Merrick Seymour with this first episode, this overview of Rethinking Church. Look forward to seeing you on the next time. Until then, have a great day. Bye-bye.